Okay, welcome everyone. This is the continuance of our May 25th, 2021 Planning, Economic Development and Land Use Committee meeting. We have discussed the two resolutions on the agenda, and we had some technical difficulties, and we'll be discussing Ordinance 132121, an ordinance amending Chapter 323 of Streets and Sidewalks of the Code of City of Albany by adding a new Article 7 entitled Small Cell Wireless Facilities in City Rights of Way. Okay, so I was just saying it's gonna be a little difficult to have a full conversation on this ordinance tonight. We don't think that the amendments that are the changes that you made, Brett, were distributed to the entire committee. So that's an oversight. And I think it would have been helpful to have somebody from the planning department here as well. So I think probably the best thing to do is to plan to meet again on this ordinance and set a date. Our conversation with Verizon and AT&T was, pretty interesting, and brought up a lot of issues and concerns that we have with the franchise agreements, but also, what we might like to see in the ordinance. And I know I have a question again, Brett. If we do pass this ordinance, and there are some differences between what's in the ordinance and what's in these franchise agreements, what does that mean?
First of all, I can't think of any instances where that would be the case necessarily, but that is a good question. I mean, generally, an agreement, I suppose the ordinance would probably govern, because it.
I generally believe our ordinance is the supplement to the franchise agreement, because everything I recall from the franchise agreement is subject to local regulations. So right. I believe it's one in this. You have the franchise agreement, which talks about the specific company, and then the overall is the ordinance that they all pull from.
So does it make sense though? I mean, if you say we passed the resolution, they've signed off on this, correct? And then we go and pass the ordinance. The ordinance would still.
From what I recall from the FCC rules, it had to be quote unquote available at the time of the franchise agreement negotiation or prior. I believe that's what the FCC order supplement said. So I think if we change it substantially, I think it would basically require us to renegotiate the franchise, I believe.
Can we get, we'd like to be sure about that. I think that's important.
I'll look into that. And as I said during the other portion of the meeting, I mean, the ordinance is only really going to come into play here once the carriers, i.e. Verizon and AT&T, actually make applications for small cell placements, and then their applications would have to be in compliance with the ordinance. The agreement is just the city saying that they have the right to enter into and build within the rights of way, but the actual applications are where we would put their proposals up against the ordinance, I guess.
So you think if we could conceivably approve these, pass the resolutions, and then pass an ordinance that has some changes in it, and then it would be, once they file the application, they would have to adhere to our ordinance. That's what we need to know.
Right, yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, not having everything up in front of me at the moment, I can't think of any instances in which the agreement and the ordinance would be contradictory to one another. Sort of, as JR said, they're more complementary. They sort of serve different functions, I guess, is my point.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
the ordinance itself is the regulations, and the contract itself is the agreement for the right of way. So they complement each other in that way.
well, they should complement each other, but you know, we've been bringing up points in the past, you know, in our past in the meeting here tonight that you know, we'd like more of assurance on certain things than we get in this agreement.
So, but is that the ordinance or is that the agreement itself?
Well, those are in the agreement.
Okay.
So the ordinance could have more, you know, specific information that was more, you know, would provide more certainty in certain areas.
Well, the ordinance itself is only about the aesthetic agreement. So the aesthetic regulation. It's nothing more than that.
Yeah, it's
No,
just.
I think it has more.
It is.
Has more about the aesthetics, the pricing.
It goes. I think it's still the ordinance is still a set of standards. It perhaps goes slightly beyond simply aesthetic standards, and you know, it talks about fees and things like that. And
yeah, because we do need established fees for not Verizon, not AT&T, the ones that are coming, you know, either from Metro PCS or Boost Mobile, whatever, who decides to light up 5G.
The other thing we have to keep in mind here is that the FCC guidance has stated that aesthetic standards have to be essentially applied evenly across the board. So you can't have one set of aesthetic standards for AT&T and another set for Verizon. They have to be
reasonable, no more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure deployments, and objective and published in advance.
correct.
And they have to be technically feasible and reasonably directed to avoid or mitigate public harm of unsightly or out of character deployments. And one thing they say specifically is aesthetic requirements that are not burdensome to similarly situated wireless infrastructure deployments are not permissive.
So the ordinance does talk about the license agreement and permit applications, both. And in that there needs to be a master license agreement, and to some extent what is in that. I have a little bit different take on this. It's good to have the ordinance because then you're applying the same law and the same standards to all providers now and moving forward. You know, I mean, by having these two agreements with AT&T and Verizon, I believe what we're being told is they are essentially identical. You avoid that if they are identical, but in terms of our current and future review, you avoid claims, reduce the likelihood of claims of being arbitrary and capricious or treating people differently if you have standards in an ordinance that you know that you are then applying. So that's what I have seen as being the benefit, and why I had anticipated that this would have been forthcoming some time ago before there were actually the negotiations.
Well,
but I think bottom line is your question, Kathy. I think Brett is saying he's taking a guess now, but he's going to look into it. Is that correct, Brett?
Yeah, I guess Councilmember Fahey, if you could just state your question one more time, just so I'm sure I'm understanding it.
well, I just want to, I mean, say we do add something in addition to the ordinance. You know, we've been talking a lot, I mean, we're gonna have that discussion with Verizon about placement of those facilities. But is there a way for us to put in the ordinance, you know, some kind, get more assurance that we're gonna have the facilities placed in underserved neighborhoods. I mean, that was the big thing, really, for me.
Okay.
And I think some of that's prevented by the,
I believe a lot,
FCC.
I think that is prevented by the FCC, but we can confirm that.
Yeah. I'll
and like, I'll give you an example, the following are the most preferred locations for the siting of new small wireless facilities. Preferred location, and then the language in here is not hard and fast. Maybe we don't, it says they want them on non-historic buildings upon which the small wireless facility can be camouflaged to match existing materials. Maybe we would decide that, that they shouldn't be placed certain places, it's more certain language. So I'm just saying, what if we do make some changes here? Will that affect the, because we've already approved the franchise agreement, is that a problem?
Again, I don't think so, because I don't think the franchise agreement goes into that sort of detail.
That's the thing. If you could find out for sure that it's the applications that are going to have to adhere to the ordinance.
Yeah.
And that we won't be, opening ourselves up to some kind of lawsuit or something as a result of making changes to the ordinance.
Yeah, I can look into that.
Okay. And people who just came on board, Tom and Alfredo, you were here, but I was saying that I think we should have someone from the planning department here, because the ordinance talks a lot about the powers of the CPO. Well, I think it's important that they weigh in on that. Anybody have any comments?
I agree with that. I think it just makes sense to have someone from planning here, and I look forward to reading the revised document that's going to get sent out. So thank you.
Okay. So I think we'll reach out again to planning and come up with a new date, and so it's not as important then that we pass this ordinance before approval of these franchise agreements.
No, subject to me confirming that my suspicion is correct about how it would work, then no, I think the agreements could be approved before the ordinance is passed. It would just be a matter of the timing of the applications then at that point, I guess. That would be the question.
And actually, one of the things we didn't bring up, Brett, is the shot clock. I want to make sure everybody understands what that is. I mean, you explained it to me.
Yeah.
And what that governs, I guess.
Yeah, so the FCC, that governs just applications. So once an application is made, again, I don't have the FCC guidance pulled up in front of me, but the FCC has prescribed certain time limitations in which the city has to consider and either approve or deny applications. So I think, if I'm remembering correctly, if it's for a co-location, the city has 60 days, according to the FCC, to consider and make a determination on an application for a co-location. And if it's a new pole, I believe it's 90 days. But that doesn't apply to these agreements. That doesn't apply to the ordinance. That just applies to once an application is made. That's how long the city has to rule on it, essentially.
Okay, and JR, had you said something differently at some point?
That's how it was. That's how it was explained differently to me based on the franchise agreement. That's what I learned.
Okay, so that's different from what you're saying, Brett. So
yeah, I would say mine is different, but I would defer to Brett on that one, because that one does seem a little bit more clear on that one.
Yeah, I mean, unless that's coming straight out of the FCC guidance document that we've been referring to for all of these things. I didn't see anything in there about the franchise agreements. It's not to say it doesn't exist.
Mine came from conversations with Marisa, that was it. And from Amy Levine before she left.
I
Oh,
pulled,
okay.
it's Brett's, the 6090. I pulled
Okay.
up FCC, that's what it says regarding the shot clock.
Okay.
And Danielle, since you made the mistake of pulling it up, now you're on the spot. Does it just say for applications there?
Give me 1 second and I'll do a cursory quick glance and let you know.
Control FOA.
Meanwhile, where are we on the shot clock? I mean, what time, how much time has passed at this point? How much time do we have left to make it?
Well, so as I said, that only applies to applications. As far as I know, no applications have been made either by Verizon or AT&T at this point, so we're not really under the shot clock, according to my reading of the rules. Now, if JR and Marisa and Amy are correct about how
So
the shot clocks work, then
that's an example though, Alfredo. All of this is very confusing. So the applications, you know, you have to have the franchise agreement in place and then they put in applications to put in these facilities.
correct.
And that's when the shot clock
I got a
begins.
fast question.
Yep.
I got a question for Brett. Brett, is there a limit how many franchises we can offer to different companies? I know we're looking at AT&T and Verizon, but if other companies want to come in, is there a limit how many we can give?
Not that I'm aware of, Councilmember Hoey. That's not to say that there isn't a limit. I'm just not aware of one. I think we also have a franchise agreement with Extranet at this point. So that would be at least three.
And I believe one for T-Mobile may be coming down the pipelines at some point.
And you know, Tom, these are 10-year franchises. So we really do want to be careful what we're agreeing to. And
Well, I'd like to see, the reason I'm bringing it up, Kathy, is competition. The more competition out there, the lower the prices are going to be. They're going to be competing against each other. So that's what I was hoping for, that we would be allowed to do multiple franchises.
Yeah.
And I can give you the quick language on the shot clock with regard to franchise agreements. It says for all FCC shot clocks, except eligible facilities request, all permits and authorizations for wireless facilities must be approved or denied within the applicable shot clock period unless the applicant agrees to a different time frame. This would include all types of permits and, if applicable, a franchise and license agreement to use city infrastructure such as streetlights.
And where is that coming from, Danielle?
I'm on some FCC website. I'll send you the link really quick.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm reading mine and it says that it's basically when the application for a permit is made for the 60-day and 90 days. So it's when the application is made to actually put it on a pole.
And that was my understanding, what JR just said.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to throw this out there. We have X number of poles. We now own our streetlights, so we know how many poles we have. We know where they are. We have all that information now after many years. And one of the things that, you know, I was kind of checking into what New York City's franchise agreements are. And one of the things they did in New York City to make sure that their underserved neighborhoods got these facilities is they only somehow, I don't understand how they're doing it, but they only, each period, and I forget how long the periods are, they'll only make available X number of poles and they're in different neighborhoods. So I don't know how that was the way they get the coverage that we're looking for.
Was that the light poles or the link stations? I believe I read that from I believe that was the link stations, that they were only going to make it available for the link stations.
I don't recall that. I thought it was the actual poles. But I just
because generally more, because the way New York City's light poles are set up, there's more light poles in the underserved areas, but when they were doing the link New York City, they try to prioritize the underserved. So I would, for me, I think they limited for the link NYC, which is the big information board that they have now in New York City.
well, anyway, it was a thought. I thought it sounded like a way to. I would just have been curious as to how they they did that. That would be, JR, I thought it was light poles, so I'm not sure. But I thought that was an interesting way to get around making sure that all the neighborhoods got these facilities.
Yeah, I mean, can we find that out? Is it possible to find out if we could, you know, auction off the poles and have them, you know, open up a certain section, certain numbers? Because it sounds to me like at some point we're gonna have one of these little boxes on almost every other block. And if you got all these different providers, you can't have.
Right, but the worry is that they're all gonna go into the, you know,
Get that.
more affluent parts of the city.
I get that 100%, which is why I like the idea of opening it up in certain sections at a time, if that's a possibility to do.
I think it would be reasonable to essentially require that when applications come in, no more, you know, we're not going to, that the chief planning official can't approve more poles in one ward or another if there is, or maybe we want to do it in census tracts, because that's a little smaller and there are certain wards that have, you know, have parts that are underserved.
So
to say basically you will not be approved for a disproportionate amount. So something like, you know, if your poles in a particular underserved area are 10% less than, you know, in other areas of the city, then you're not going to get approved for more. I think that there's got to be a way for us to be able to say something in terms of the distribution of this.
And I'm not saying there's not a way to accomplish that. I think we just need to bear in mind that the FCC guidance says that our standards cannot be more burdensome. They can be no more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure deployments. So that's just something we need to.
Yeah, and another thing we want to be mindful of, it's not just our existing streetlight poles. This also allows for new poles in general. As what I've seen in some of my research, this could also be in traffic lights as well. These facilities can affix to a lot of many different things, because with the 5G network, this is trying to become the next way of internet. That's, they're trying to get rid of the wires essentially.
Wow.
And Brett, with regard to other infrastructure, we require, National Grid provides electricity every place. Our water and sewer department provides water and sewer every place. I think that Spectrum is providing cable in every neighborhood.
No.
Yeah, my point more was that if we impose a requirement that they can only put so many facilities in certain neighborhoods, or I just don't think that's a requirement that we impose on other infrastructure providers, I guess.
Like what?
Well, the other thing is I want to say is that Spectrum, Verizon, these agreements are separate and apart. They're apples and oranges. So I just want to give that distinction. But with the small cell facility, it's more of a, I can't even describe it. It's more of a where they place it, because it has to be one in equal. It has to be in equal non-burdensome ways, because the other way of one way that having them go on our street poles, but they can also say, well, we'd rather put a new pole, and the FCC order allows that as well. So if we're going to limit their application, their permit would have to be applicable to either new poles or existing utility poles.
Could we bring in that they have to do per population? That's the way we can get equity. That equal parts of the, population is served?
I guess I'm not really in a position, as I sit here tonight, to speak to any particular requirement. I think any requirement we would come up with, we would have to look at pretty closely as compared against the FCC guidance on the standard. So I mean, and don't get me wrong, I think these are all proposals that are aiming towards a noble goal that's in line with our equity agenda. I think all I'm saying is we need to be careful in how we apply these things, and if we were to codify them, we need to make sure they are in line with FCC regulations.
It might be worth pursuing though, and then to find out, what kind of trouble we could get into with it. So Judy, were you thinking an ordinance?
I actually think, one of the things, Dave has a lot of experience. Is knowledgeable about this, Mr. Brennan. And I'm thinking maybe somebody ought to get in touch with him and say, hey, what kind of language already exists or might be out there, that addresses this, that your client might be amenable to, since they're saying they're going to be providing, they're saying we would be pleasantly surprised when we see, what their proposed deployments are.
I'll send around Syracuse's municipal code, because they just got back to me because I reached out to them because they're the latest one with the 5G that got lit up recently, and I pulled up their ordinance, so I'll send that around too. And this is a little different than ours.
Yeah, I agree with everybody. I think we need to do this right and take our time and make sure we figure something out that benefits all of our residents, especially our most vulnerable. Because these companies are going to make their profit off this a lot more than what the fees they're charging us or we're charging them. So we want to make sure that we get the best service for our most vulnerable communities as well. So and I think it's going to be much more research, and maybe even using the census tract or something that's a little more specific, so that we actually get the targeted groups that we're trying to get in the targeted neighborhoods that have had to deal with this in the most negative way.
Yeah, and if you council members have proposals to that effect that you would like to explore, whether it's using census tracts or any other metric, feel free to send those to me, and I can start trying to, I guess, vet those proposals to see if there are avenues we might be able to pursue. I'm happy to do that.
So Brett, I think that we're talking about the general gist of what we want to accomplish. And I do think that it can be very worthwhile to talk to Dave Brennan about if he has any examples or thoughts, so that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel if there's already something that is addressing this, or if he has, in his experience, potential solutions that get us to yes. I think that that this may be one, if not the most significant issue that we're looking at trying to address. I think that if we entered into these agreements and then found that, oh, well, they're not unduly discriminating against residents, but it just so happens that the deployment happens to be in the 9th Ward and the 14th Ward and the 8th Ward substantially first. I think that would be.
And we know that's going to be the case.
Well, actually, though, Kathy, when they were talking about where their high impact areas are and where there's a lot of competition about it, they were talking about, in and around the schools. So I would think that there's going to be deployment immediately right around Albany High School, which is, part of the 11th ward that is considered to be an underserved area. Certainly a lower income area. The Hackett Middle School area, and then and then we have
Well,
the other
what
middle
is, they
school.
said the reach is 500 feet with the 5G, right? So what is that,
Right.
block? Does
It's not
anybody know?
even. It's not even. So when Alfredo is talking, oh, we're going to have it on every block or every other block, it's like, no, they need to put like 4 of them on Ramsey Place. Is so 500 feet. You figure the average street frontage is about 30 to 40 feet. So every 10 to 12 houses. So she said 500. Somebody else in the presentation said 1,000 feet. But I think that says 1,000 might be, then you might be challenged to get reception if you're at the 1,000 feet.
I thought she was talking about 4G for that now.
And that's circular, by the way. So that'll get
4G
people.
is 5,000 feet is what she said.
Oh.
I made a point of.
And 5G, from what I understand, doesn't go through walls as great as 4G.
Tom, what were you saying?
It's circular, so it'd be 500 feet in a circle. That'd be a diameter of the circle. So the houses on the next block are also going to pick it up.
Okay.
I guess I got one question. I probably should have asked them when they were here. Do we have any information or data about any health issues that we should be concerned about putting these all over the city?
Alfredo, there are people who, and websites actually, that are very concerned about these, I don't forget, what do you call it, waves or so on. But I think it's all been, there's plenty of people who think that is not the case, that there are no health issues related to this.
They do cover it in the documents they sent us that they're FCC compliant. Whether the FCC's up to date is another story.
Right, and there, I was looking at, there are municipalities that, they've agreed not to have these wireless facilities placed in their towns as a result of that. So it's not, there is concern out there.
Can we put somebody in that can give us more information about that? Is there someone that,
Yeah, well, that was maybe something we could have brought up with these folks, but
are we going to have them back? Are we
what?
them back again?
Can't hear you.
Are we bringing them back for a second round?
We are bringing them back.
Maybe we could also bring somebody from health sciences to give us some better information, because I just want to make sure we're doing something that's going to be safe, especially if we're going to be putting these all over the city. I mean, it may not be in the next year or two, but it may be in the next year or two. I mean, depends how quick this is supposed to replace the wire, then it may be sooner than we think.
I know there's someone at New Albany who speaks out against, this type of technology because of the health effects. But I think there's plenty of people out there who don't agree.
The bottom line, though, is the FCC mandate, says it's okay. We can't go against what the FCC says. I think that's.
But do we have to accept these 5Gs? I mean, is it something we have to accept?
Brett, JR?
I mean, I'll look into what cities have prohibited it, but I believe it was I have to look at what their rationale was, but I couldn't give you an answer right now.
I don't have a good answer to that specific question off the top of my head. I think generally speaking, the scientific, I won't say consensus necessarily, but I think generally speaking, the science indicates that 5G is safe. And as Councilmember Hoey said, the FCC has come down on that side of things, that 5G is safe. So, I mean, I don't know. I would have to look into that specific question as to whether we can prohibit 5G from coming into the city on those grounds.
We can't, because we've already allowed 5G to come in, right? And we've got to keep.
Probably a good point that might be a little late for that, for a prohibition.
Did you hear that, Alfredo? Is
But I heard it.
Is that the case because it's been allowed in, Brett, that we wouldn't be able to?
Again, I would have to look into that for sure. I don't know off the top of my head. To be
Okay.
honest.
It's good to know if we have options. I mean, and it's a question that I would definitely ask when they come back again. And I'll do some of my own research and maybe we can bring somebody in. I think we have to at least do our due diligence, especially if you know, the more I think about it, it's one thing to have 1 or 2 or 3 here, but you know, Judy's right. We're gonna have these everywhere. We should at least look into it. You know. So okay, thank you.
All right, JR, is that something you could get us some information on?
Sure.
Thank you. So I think for now, Judy, as far as Dave Brennan is concerned, I'm happy to reach out to him. Maybe, are you interested in being part of that? Having a phone conversation with him?
I was actually thinking the lawyers talking to the lawyers, not me.
Yeah, I was
paid lawyers.
I was probably going to talk to Mr. Brennan anyway, so I'm happy to take the lead on that.
Because
terrific.
I think ultimately what I'm looking for is, you know, somebody doing the research to figure out how do we get at our ultimate objective that we're talking about here. And there's a lot of ways you can slice and dice it. I'm just thinking that if we have somebody with experience, that's one of the first places I like to go to bat around ideas with people about.
No, I know he was recommended by Amy.
Yep.
As a resource. So Brett, you're going to follow up on that?
Sure.
And
well, maybe Brett and JR together, sitting in a conversation there.
However we want to work.
Yeah, no, Mr. Brennan's really good. He's really good with it.
Okay, so anything else before? I mean, we're going to have to set up another date. I'm going to talk to planning, see if we need them involved in this. And we'll want to get some more information. People want to think more about what's being proposed in the resolutions as well. And we'll set up another meeting date. Any other comments before we really adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Second from Alfredo. Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night.